Hi everybody, this is my brackish tank and we're going to start out by having a look at this for the time being. This video is actually going to be about tannins and tannin buildup in our aquariums. I've been watching this tank for the last several days and I've been thinking about it more and more. It's been quite a while since I've done a water change on this tank. I'm really bad about doing water changes on my brackish tank because it's water I have to prepare. So the end result is I generally go longer between water changes than normal, and I know it's kind of hard to tell, but this tank has a lot of tannins that are really built up in it. My quarantine tank that sits just below this, I did a water change on that this morning, and while I know the background and everything is somewhat different, it will still give you an idea between tannin stained water and clear water. Gives you a little comparison there. So the thing that really got me thinking about the tannins in this tank and wanting to shoot a video about it is most people think of tannins coming from woodwork in the tank, and if you'll notice, there is absolutely no woodwork in this tank at all, and yet the water is very tea stained. I know, again, it's hard to tell, you don't have a whole lot to compare it to, but just using that as a small example will give you an idea of how much darker the water in the tank above is. So let's have a look at another tank, my crayfish tank, and this is the one that really got me thinking about it. The other day I filmed this tank and it was really filthy and the glass was all dirty. I wasn't expecting to see my crayfish moving around in it, but he was, and I tried to video him and could not. So when I got in to clean the glass, I figured, what the hell, I'll do a water change. I haven't done a water change on this tank in months. So it's got about 2.5 to 3 gallons of water, and I did about 1.5 gallons, almost 2 gallons of a water change. So let's have a look at two buckets side by side. One is the water that came out of this tank, and the other is the water that came out of the quarantine tank that I just showed you, which has nothing in it at all. It was actually fresh water. I'm still cycling that tank in. So let's have a comparison and remember what this looks like now. Look how nice and clear that water is. That's the water on the right that came out of that crayfish tank. That is very, very tannin stained water. So, once again, not a single piece of woodwork in this tank, yet I had, dark tea stained water. So where does it come from? It comes from the plants. Plants produce tannic acid, and it leaches out of pretty much every part of them, the roots especially. So in this tank, I have all these lovely, beautiful Java fern roots in the tank, and of course you can see chunks of that Java fern are breaking down and decaying, and when they do, just like tea leaves will stain your water brown, decaying leaves can be up to 50% of leaf's weight can be in tannins, believe it or not. So decaying leaves in your tank are a major source of tannins, and roots from plants are another. If we have a look at this tank, I've got a fairly large piece of wood right there, and then I also have another fairly large piece of wood right here, and both of these have been submerged for, well, this one's been submerged for a little more than a year now. It's been in this tank, and this piece of wood started out in my angelfish tank a couple of years ago, so this has probably been underwater for about 3 years now, and you can probably still sort of tell that I've got a nice yellowish tint to this tank as well. So moving on to look at this tank, this is a fairly new setup, and it is already really, really dark with tannins. Now you can see in this tank I've got an awful lot of woodwork, and that's obviously the source of such a heavy load of tannins. But all of this wood came from the bottom of a river. So it's been submerged long enough that it's all waterlogged and sunken down, and yet I'm still getting tannins from it. So what do we know about tannins? We know that they are produced by plants. We know that they give a brown coloration. So any wood that we have that is a dark colored wood is more loaded with tannins than a lighter colored wood. I'm not sure why, but we typically don't put soft woods in our aquariums. We usually typically put hardwoods in. And most hardwoods have a darker color. You can get stuff like oak, that would be a lighter color. And the lighter it is, the less tannins you're going to see in there. But usually wood that is a nice dark, rich color is what we want. That's what I like anyway. I mean, look at that. It's just beautiful. So this is all of the source of tannins in these tanks. This is another tank. I just did a major water change on this one, and it's nice and crystal clear now. Give it a week, and it'll be starting to get tea-stained. And you give it, maybe 3 weeks to a month before I do a really, another big water change in there, and that water will be nice and brown again. So one of the things that I hear about tannins a lot is how they reduce your pH. And they do. But they only reduce your pH so much. They're not magic. And they will only reduce your pH relative to your tank's buffering capacity. If you've got a tank that's got fairly hard water in it and you're trying to lower your pH a little bit, you want to bring that alkalinity down a little bit, it's often recommended that you put peat in your filter, you put some driftwood in your tank, and that will give you, it'll lower your pH or whatever. But will it? And how much will it? Let's consider if you've got hard water and your pH is up around 8.5, you've got a lot of buffering capacity in that tank. Now, buffering capacity simply means your tank's ability to resist change in pH. Doesn't mean it raises your pH, doesn't mean it lowers your pH. It means it's the ability to resist change. So you can actually have buffers in your tank that keep your pH low. It simply resists the change of shifting your pH. So the more buffer you have in your tank, the more stable your pH is going to be. So if you start adding a little bit of tannic acid, well, if you've got a lot of buffer in your tank, you're not going to really shift your pH very much because there's not a ton of acid being produced. I know it looks like a lot when you get these tanks that are nice and tea-stained like that. Just did a water change on this one not too long ago either, and we got the tank nice and brightened up a little bit too. So the idea that you're going to put some driftwood in your tank or some peat in your tank and just magically lower your pH is a little bit of a misunderstanding. I have a lot of people ask me if they can put some driftwood in their tank to actually soften their water, and that's a complete misunderstanding. The only way you soften water is by removing iron, calcium, and magnesium, and adding tannins to the water does not remove anything else. So you cannot soften water by adding driftwood or anything like that. That's something completely different. You can lower the pH, however, and most people associate a higher pH with harder water, and I guess they associate a lower pH with softer water, and they assume if the pH is coming down, then the hardness must be coming down as well, and that's not how that works. You have to put a ton of tannins in your tank to work against the buffer of hard water. It's really wants to stay where it is, the pH that is. So you need a lot of tannins to bring it down. Actually, you know what? Let's go have a look at this water and test its pH. The pH of the water that comes out of my tap is around 7.3, and that is pretty much what the water was when it went in this tank. This tank does not have any calcium-based rocks. In other words, there's nothing in this tank that's actually going to raise the pH. pH in your tank will raise over time for various reasons, and I expect it to be a little higher in this tank. My tanks that don't have driftwood in them, the pH tends to rise. So I've already tested the pH on this tank, and I was really surprised by it, and we're going to go have a look at the test vials in a minute. So this is one of those tanks that I would expect the pH to rise since I don't have any driftwood. But as I just showed you, driftwood or no, the roots from all the plants in this tank have given us some seriously tannin-stained water. So I wasn't expecting to see anything really acidic, as much as you might expect that to be really acidic. You know, that's almost black water. You'd expect that to be around 6.2 or something, but it was not. So let's go over and have a look, and I'll show you exactly what we've got. Alright, the one thing we've got is a lot of confusion. So let's start by looking at my vials right here. The vial on the left is my low range pH, and that is showing way above that blue there on the bottom where it says 7.6, if it'll focus on that. We're showing way bluer than that. So it's the bottom range, it tends to get out of its reckoning once you get above about 7.2, 7.3. That's why there's that big jump between 7.2 and 7.6. So the high range, the brown one, is showing me at 7.4. So usually when I've got something like that, it doesn't really make any sense. I'm not, I usually put it somewhere around 7.5. That would be a little higher than my tap water. My tap water is usually about 7.3. So I used my brand new pH meter. I don't know if it'll actually give us any results here. I tested it on my tap water, and this gives you an idea of how tannin stained that water is. That's a very small glass of water, yet look how dark you can see that. So this usually takes about 30 seconds of sitting in the water to really come down and stabilize. In fact, the light usually goes off before it's stabilized and you can't really see it. So I tested it earlier. My tap water came out at 7.31, so I knew that I was pretty much accurate with my tap water. So we're still rounding out there. So I was around 7.3 on my tap water, which is what I expected. When I test this water, I keep getting 8.1 to 8.2 with my pH tester, but what we just saw with my vials is showing me around 7.5. So am I at 8.1 or am I at 7.5? This is a new pH tester. I did calibrate it when I bought it, and it is showing my tap water right about where I expect it. I have not tested my tap water to the vial, so I don't know. Again, this isn't science. This is just me tinkering, getting an idea of what's going on. So having said that, see, we're back up to 8.03. So again, as tannin stained as that water is, it's got a pH approaching, if not 8 or higher than 8, based on what my meter says, and even based on what the vials say. I'm looking at 7.5 pH. That is actually a higher pH than my tap water, which comes out just above neutral, just this side of neutral. So not really sure what to make of that. I really honestly cannot tell you why that pH is that high with that much tannins in there. I don't really understand that. But it is a good example of how tannins do not magically make your water really acidic and really lower the acidity in your water. There's a lot of other factors involved in what makes your pH what it is. So tannins don't just drop your pH through the floor when you've got a little bit of driftwood in there. So let's go back over and look at the tanks, and I have a few final thoughts, and we will wrap this video up. Alright, and for my final thoughts, I will actually give you a little bit of a bonus. I think I'll do a water change here on this brackish tank tonight, and we will get a little bit of a before and after to show you how much a 5-gallon, that's 25%, water change will do on this tank. I'm not going to make it a water change video. I'm just going to show you the before and after, and we can have a little bit of chat about tannins. So here's your before, and there's your after. Now the point I wanted to make by showing you this is that there's not a lot of change. It doesn't really reduce the tannins as much as you might think. Now I did a full 5 gallons, which in this tank, with the substrate and the rocks and everything that are in there, that's well over a 25% water change. Let's call it a 30% water change. If you will look down here in the bucket, you can see that it's pretty tannin stained. It's nothing like that, of course, but you can see it's got some stain to it. But the tank still looks kind of dark. So the reason I point this out is one of the questions I get most frequently from people about tannins is how they can reduce them. They keep saying that they're doing water changes, but they never really seem to go anywhere. Their tank always seems to stay brown. So the only real things I can suggest are doing more frequent or larger water changes. You have to be careful with the size of your water changes, though, depending on your water chemistry. Or remove the causes of the tannins. Those are really your only options. You can run activated carbon in your tank, but it removes so little, in my experience, that you would have to put like a pound of carbon in your filter and swap it out every day or two to have any kind of impact on the amount of tannins that are in your tank. The question I have for everybody that wants to remove the tannins from their tank is, why does everybody want to remove their tannins from their tank so much? I mean, I can understand that there's different, people have different aesthetic appeals. If you simply don't like the brown look to the water, that I can understand that. I personally don't mind it. I think it actually looks kind of good. I like a nice tannin stained tank. But the tannins are not harmful to your fish at all. In fact, they're actually good for your fish. They have antifungal properties. The tannins in the water actually have antibacterial properties. They can help reduce the chances of any parasites getting on your animals. And there's other things that have to do with stress hormones and things like that. I started reading a little bit about tannins today, and once it started getting into the chemistry of how it bonds to different alkaloids and this and that and the other thing, I get lost. So I didn't really feel like I needed to dig that deep into the effects of tannins. I just know that tannins are actually really good for your fish, and it's good for your fish tank. Even if you've got harder water, it may not reduce your pH very much, but you're still putting the tannins in your tank, and it's still going to have the same antibacterial and antifungal effect as it would in a softer water tank like I have. Although this, being a brackish tank, is not a soft water tank at all. It's actually very hard, quite the opposite end of the spectrum, but that's the same principle applies. It's still got those tannins in the tank. So ask yourself, when you do want to remove these tannins so desperately from your tank and you're doing all these water changes to get rid of them, ask yourself why. Is it really just an aesthetic appeal? And if so, is that aesthetic appeal based on your belief that the tannins in the water somehow make it dirty or something like that? Because they really don't. They're actually a very good, healthy part of a tank, and most natural environments in the outdoors have tannins in them. Even if you look at those crystal clear streams, they're in there. You just don't see them as much as a standing body of water. So those are my thoughts on tannins. I'm sure I missed some points. I'm sure there's still some questions out there. Feel free to ask them. If I don't know you the answer, I can always look it up, or I'll simply tell you that I don't know the answer. I was wondering if he was ever going to get around to eating one of those snails. I threw a few of them in there after the water change, and he is a really finicky eater. And of course, whenever he sees me standing here with the camera, he always gets suspicious. He wants to know what I'm up to. So that's why he's been taking so long to get around to eating those snails. Anyway, this is my brackish tank, as I keep saying. So make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss anything else I got coming up. I did shoot a little bit of video of him investigating one of the snails, and he never did eat it. He finally swam around the back of the tank, so we just called it good, and I got a short little video I'm going to lay some music over, and that'll be that. So you don't want to miss that or anything else coming up. So thanks for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed. Hope that was helpful to somebody, and I will see you real soon on the next one.